when people die, they stay dead, unless it's a Hollywood movie. And then you got the return of the zombies and all those kind of things. But when people die, they stay dead. And nowhere in the Gospels do we see anybody standing at the tomb on that first day as the sun is rising. Nobody's standing there going, all right, remember what he said. 10, 9, 8, somebody cue the sun. 7, 6, is everybody here? Nobody expected that. Instead, Jesus' core followers, they gathered together and they spent the couple of days right after his death, and they're trying to wrap their minds about what has just happened. I mean, they'd entered the city with the crowds roaring, make him a king, make him a king, and now here we are. He's dead. He's gone. We've invested 3 years of our lives. We abandoned our jobs, we abandoned our ways of living, and we followed this guy, and to be honest, we had something in it for us. We hoped that he would become king. I mean, they were ready to make him king, and then if he was made king, then we would be somebody, because we would be right beside him. We would be beside him, we would have influence, we would have position, we would have power. But now, that's all gone. Because he's gone. Because Jesus is gone. And I can't help but wonder if they sat around so many times like we do, when someone we care about passes away. We begin to kind of tell stories. We begin to kind of reminisce about their life and experiences that we experienced with them. And I wonder if Peter, sitting there in that room with the other guys, are sitting there going, I remember the time when I first really kind of met Jesus. We were there by the Sea of Galilee. Remember that? We'd been fishing all night long. We were exhausted. And this huge crowd comes up. And they're pressing up against Jesus. And he's right at the edge of the water. And I remember him looking over at me. And he said, hey, can we use your boat? Can you row me out just a little ways? And so I was like, why not? So Jesus got in the boat. We rowed out a little ways. And he taught with authority. He spoke in a way unlike any other that I'd ever heard. And then when he was done and the crowd started to kind of walk away a little bit, he asked me to do something that was really strange. He said, let's go out a little ways and let's drop the nets. And I wanted to tell him that we had been fishing all night and had caught nothing. I wanted to tell him, Jesus, you're the rabbi. Jesus, you're the teacher. Jesus, you're a carpenter, not a fisherman. People don't fish in the day. Jesus, nobody catches fish during the daytime. And so I went ahead and rowed out. And Andrew and John and John, or Andrew, James, and John were there at the shore. And I know you guys were looking at me. Yeah, we were looking at you going, what is he doing? And I said, Jesus, because you said so, I'll do it. So I threw the net out. And I remember I thought I'd hung up on something. I was pulling. All of a sudden, I began to see the water boil. And the guys on the shore said, we saw it too. And so you screamed, come on out here. I need your help. And we brought the other boat. We filled up both boats full of fish. And we just bowed down. We just fell on our knees right before him. And Jesus says, he said, follow me. Follow me and I'll make you fishers of men. And we looked at each other because we had no idea what he was talking about. But we followed him. There were so many things that happened right there in that area around the Sea of Galilee. Remember that time whenever we had rowed out and it was a long day, we were exhausted. Jesus was tired. He was asleep in the front of the boat. And man, the waves started coming in and the wind was blowing. I mean, we never saw this storm coming. And all of a sudden, the boat was filling up with water. Remember that? And he goes, yeah, we were like scared. And we thought we were going to die. And finally, John, you went up there and you woke Jesus up and you said, Jesus, don't you care? We're about to die. And Jesus kind of wakes up and he says, why are you guys so afraid? And we're like, look around, Jesus. Look around. I mean, the wind, the waves, the boat's taking in a lot of water. We're about to die. And he did something so amazing and so incredible. He spoke and the waves stopped, and the wind stopped. And we were like, who does that? Who does that? Or what about that other time? Remember that other time? We had that huge crowd of people. And Jesus had been speaking all day long. And we got towards the end of the day, and everybody's stomachs are growling and everything. We're like, man, we're so hungry. And remember, we went to Jesus and we go, man, Jesus, everybody's hungry. What do we do? And Jesus said, let's feed them. And there was no place around. We couldn't get food. There were no fast food places. There was no food to be had. Andrew, remember what you did? He goes, man, I was just messing with you guys. I saw this kid. He had a couple of fish and about 5 loaves. And I thought, well, if nobody else eats, at least I'll get 2. But I was messing with you. I was like, hey, look, I got 5 loaves and 2 fish, you know. And Jesus said, that'll do. And next thing you know, we saw him. He was breaking the bread. And he was sitting there, and he was putting it in baskets. And all of a sudden, we fed all these people. I mean, there had to have been over 5,000 people there. And remember what happened after that? Remember that same night? Remember Jesus said, hey, you guys go ahead. And we were just like, all right, we're going ahead. Because I mean, it's just been a long day. And we got in the boat and we took off. And it started getting dark. And it was about the time we got a ways out. We're rowing and we're rowing. We're not getting anywhere because the wind's coming against us. And it kind of dawned on us, how is Jesus going to catch up with us? How's he going to get to the other side here? I mean, we got to go back and get what's going to happen? Because remember what happened? They go, oh man, I'll never forget that night. I remember looking over and seeing somebody walking across the water. And I thought, we all screamed, ghost, ghost. And Jesus goes, no. It's me. It's Jesus. Peter, remember what you did? Yeah, I remember. Because man, that was pretty cool. Yeah. I remember getting out into the boat. And I remember kind of hanging on to the side of the boat, and I looked across there, and I saw the face of Jesus. And he was like, come on. And he had this smile on his face. He was like, come on. And I remember stepping out of the boat and walking towards him, and him just smiling just from ear to ear. And he's like, good job, Peter. Good job. And then that wave, a wave came up and hit me. And it distracted me, and I started looking around, and the waves were all around. I looked back, and the boat was way back there, and the wind was blowing, and all of a sudden I kind of freaked out. And I started sinking. And I screamed out, Jesus, help me. And Jesus just kind of shook his head, and he came over and got me and goes, why did you doubt? Why did you doubt? And I remember he brought me back to the boat. And then he did it again. He calmed the waters, and the wind stopped. And we sat there and we thought, who does this? Who does this? And we said, truly you are the Son of God. I guess we were wrong. Because if he was the Son of God, when they came to arrest him, he would have resisted. He would have been victorious. He would have been made king. But instead he didn't even put up a fight. It's as if he just wanted to surrender himself to them. Peter would say, I even drew my sword. I was willing to fight with him. And he took my hand and he said, no, Peter, put it up. And then, I don't remember which one of us took off running first, but I just remember we all ran. We left him. And I wonder if Peter in that room, things got a little quiet for a moment. And Peter, with his head just kind of down, he says, I haven't told anybody this. I'm just so ashamed of it. You see, I found out where they took Jesus the other night. They had taken him to Caiaphas, the high priest, and they had him there at his place with all the other religious leaders. And so I wanted to get close enough to see if I could see what was going on. And while I was standing there close by, this girl comes up to me and she says, weren't you with Jesus? Weren't you with him? And I told her, no, I wasn't with him. She walked away, And I kept trying to find out what was going on with Jesus. And pretty soon she came back and she said, "Are you sure? Because you look really familiar. I'm pretty sure I've seen you with Jesus." No. I've seen Jesus a couple of times, but I don't know him. Well, some others had heard this. And I guess they recognized my Galilean accent, and maybe somebody else had recognized me also. Because they walked up to me and they said, "We think you were with him." And I began to just curse, and I began to get loud, and I began to tell them, "I never met him. I do not know him." And I walked away. And I was so ashamed. I was so ashamed. But I guess that doesn't matter now. I guess it doesn't matter now because he's gone. And while the guys were probably reminiscing about this, the girls, the ladies, they were followers of Jesus also, and they knew that he had been buried in such a hurry that he probably hadn't gotten a proper burial. And so they began to gather some spices together, and they were going to go to the tomb, and they were going to make sure that Jesus was given a proper burial. And so here's what happens. Mark chapter 16, Mark tells us this. He says, "When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome brought spices so they might go and anoint Jesus." Everything had happened so fast. Thursday, Jesus is arrested. Friday, Jesus is tried, convicted, and crucified. And here they are, early on Sunday morning, and they're approaching the tomb. Mark says this, he says, very early on that first day of the week, just after sunrise, they were on their way to the tomb. And they're probably asking each other, "Hey, did you get this? You got plenty of that? You got that? Hey, did you get the..." Yes. But there was one thing that they had forgotten. You see, they had seen the large stone rolled in front of the tomb. And so they were like, who's going to roll that stone away for us? And then when they got close, but when they looked up, they saw that the stone, which was very large, had been rolled away. John, one of Jesus' disciples, he takes this same account, and here's what he says. He says, "Early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb and saw the stone had been removed from the entrance. So she came running to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one Jesus loved, and said, They have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we don't know where they have taken him." Who are the they? You see, nobody expected Jesus to be gone. So Peter and the other disciple started for the tomb. Both were running, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. He bent over and he looked at the strips of linen lying there, but did not go in. I'm guessing that he's kind of standing there kind of going, "I'm not sure I want to go in there right now. That's where dead people go in. I'm going to stay out here." Some of you guys have phobias about places like that. I get that. Then Simon Peter, who was behind him, arrived, and he goes straight into the tomb, and he saw the strips of linen lying there, as well as the burial cloth that had been around Jesus' head. The cloth was folded up by itself and separate from the linen. Look at the detail that John gives us. Finally, the other disciple who had reached the tomb first also went inside, and he saw and he believed. He believed. Not believed that Jesus rose from the grave. He believed Jesus was actually gone. He goes inside, looks around, and goes, "No, you're right. He is gone. He is gone." And so Luke, here's what Luke writes about this same thing. Luke writes this, and he gives us this account. Now, Luke wasn't an eyewitness, but Luke had interviewed several people, hundreds of people probably, about this incident along with so many others. And so here's what Luke says. Chapter 24. He says, "But they did not believe the women." This is the same incident. We're still at the tomb. They didn't believe the women because their words seemed like nonsense. He's got to be there somewhere. Peter, however, got up, ran to the tomb. Bending over, he saw the strips of linen lying there by themselves, and he went away. And he was wondering to himself, what had happened? You see, if you're skeptical about Jesus and the resurrection, that somebody could actually die and come back to life, you're in good company. You're in good company. You're not alone. You see, these guys, the same as you possibly, believe that Jesus was dead. And dead people stay dead. These men and women had given up all hope. They thought it was all over. There was no movement. There was no believers. There were no Christians at this moment. Just men and women who thought that maybe he was the guy. That maybe he was the Messiah. But yet, he couldn't be. Because he was dead. Along with their dreams. So, here's the question. Why are you here? Why are we here? Why are there people in churches all around right now? Why are there people in churches all around the world right now? Why are people, talking about a dead man who claimed to be the Messiah, the Son of God? What changed? What made the difference? What made a difference in Jesus claiming to be the Messiah than any of the other people claiming to be Messiahs during that first century? Why? Well, let's find out. John, one of Jesus' closest disciples, here's what he writes. Here's what he has written. John chapter 20. This is that same day that they've gone to the tomb. This is later on that evening. They've gone to the tomb, again, conversations. Man, what happened to him? Where did he go? I wonder what happened. I wonder, somebody stole his body. I mean, what's going on? On that evening of the first day, when the disciples were together, with doors locked for the fear of the Jews, they are in this room hiding. Their doors are locked. Why? Because the Jews that killed Jesus could be after his followers also. And they're afraid. And this is what happens next. Jesus came and stood among them, and he said, "Peace be with you." Why? Why would he say, "Peace be with you"? Because if a dead person I knew was dead now showed up and they walked into my room with me, I need some peace. You know what I'm saying? I mean, I'm going to be freaked out. And he said this, he showed him his hands and his sides. And the disciples were overjoyed with what they saw. Now Luke interviews eyewitnesses. Luke writes this about what happened. He says this in chapter 24, says, they were startled and frightened. And I think that's a huge understatement. Okay? I don't think he could elaborate enough on that. They were startled and frightened, thinking they saw a ghost. And Jesus said to them, "Why are you troubled? Why do you have doubts? Why are we troubled? A dead man, you are dead. And now you're standing in the same room with us. Why did we have doubts? Because dead people stay dead." Jesus, he goes, "Look at my hands." Jesus goes, "Look at my hands and my feet. It is myself. Touch me and see." A ghost doesn't have flesh and bones. In case you think I'm a ghost like you thought whenever we were out by the water and stuff, come and touch and see. And then they still couldn't hardly believe it. While they still did not believe because of the joy and amazement, he says, all right. Do you have anything to eat? You're like, well, we're eating some fish. He goes, "Give me some fish. Give me some more fish." And Jesus takes it and he eats it right in front of them. And then he says to them, he says, "This is what I told you while I was still with you. Everything must be fulfilled that is written about me in the law of Moses and the prophets and the Psalms." And this is simply the Hebrew Bible, if you would. Yours and mine, Old Testament. All right? Jesus goes, "Look, it was there, plain as day as you could see." And he goes, and you weren't listening. You didn't listen. And they didn't. Every time Jesus talked about something bad happening to him, hey, let me tell you what's going to happen to me, guys, Every time they were like, I can't hear you. They just tuned out. It's kind of like ladies when your husband, you tell him something, and maybe he's watching TV or looking at his phone or he's kind of preoccupied with something else, and you tell him something. And then the next day you go, "Hey, did you get? Hey, did you do? Hey, did you know whatever that hey was that you told him the day before?" And he goes, "You didn't tell me that." You know what I'm talking about? Yeah, my wife's the only one that can say that. She didn't know what I'm talking about. But it's kind of that thing. I mean, here he is. And so Jesus says this. He says, "Then he opened their minds so they could understand the Scriptures." And the Scriptures isn't our New Testament stuff that we have, all right? It's the prophecies that was told about him, okay? And he told him, he goes, this is what was written. The Christ will suffer and rise from the dead on the third day. And they're like, oh, yeah. And that's not all. And repentance and forgiveness of sin will be preached in his name. And this is where it gets good. This is where it gets even better. It goes to all the nations. Not just to a specific people group, not just to a Jewish people, to the children of Israel, but to all the nations. And it's going to start right here. It's going to start right here in Jerusalem. And then he says something that is so vitally important, so important. I don't want you to miss this. He said this. He goes, you are witnesses of these things. You are witnesses of these things. These men, along with so many others, Luke would later write, he said there were over 500 people that saw Jesus alive. Some of these same people were the same ones that had seen him die. And so Jesus was alive. This one event would change the world. It would launch the church. The resurrection of Jesus Christ created Christianity and launched the church. Before the resurrection, no believers, no movement. No one was going to repeat Jesus' teachings. If Jesus had not come back alive, we wouldn't know the story about the prodigal son or all those other stories. Because Jesus would have been just like all the other wannabe messiahs. And he would have been completely forgotten. They would have disassociated themselves with him. They would have never, weren't you with that? No, not with that guy. He was a nobody. He was a fake, so I heard. And so the reason, here's this, don't miss this. And if you're a Christ follower and you've been for a long time and this is kind of disturbing to you, stay with me. The reason we believe in the resurrection in Jesus Christ isn't because the Bible tells us so. It's not. The reason why we believe that Jesus rose from the grave is because of the eyewitness accounts of what happened. The eyewitness accounts. We believe Matthew. Matthew, one of Jesus' disciples. Matthew says, you know what? I was a nobody. I was a nothing. I was not a very nice person. Jesus comes along and says, follow me. And I watched him. I watched him die on that cross. And I watched him enter that room that day. Nail-scarred hands and feet. And I saw him. Mark would say, I talked to Peter, and Peter, man, he told me about all these different events, and I began to write them down. Luke would tell us, I've got this friend named Theophilus, and Theophilus said, hey, I've heard about this Jesus guy. Go and get all the information you can on this, and I'll pay you for it. Get all the information you can. And so I dug, and I talked to witness after witness after witness, and I interviewed them. And I'm a pretty smart guy. And I began to write down these interviews, and then it captured my attention so much, I had to kind of follow this group of people and see if it was really real for myself. And then there was John. I mean, John, one of Jesus' own guys. John says, I was an eyewitness. I was there. I was there for the whole thing. I mean, Jesus is on the cross. I know he was dead. He said, hey, can you take care of my mom? I was there. And then there's Peter. Peter would later on write or have written for him a couple of different things we'll look at here in just a moment. But Peter, he goes, look, I believed, and then I unbelieved, and then I believed again, and then I denied, and then now I believe. I'm all in. And then there was James. Not James the disciple, but James, Jesus' brother. James, who would be the leader of the Jerusalem church, the church in Jerusalem. Now let me ask you this. What would it take for your brother to call you Lord? Yeah. It might take, you actually resurrecting from the dead or something. And so James is all in. I mean, he's there, he believes it. And then there's Paul. Paul, who is on the rise in basically in the world of religion. He would probably become a high priest someday. I mean, he had the best of the best teaching. He was an extremely intelligent man. And he says, you know what? Jesus did resurrect. And I'm all in. And he would go and he would begin to start churches, and he would be probably one of the most powerful, influential men in starting the church in that first century. The Apostle Paul. So, you see, the reason we believe is not because the Bible said so, because there was no Bible in the first century. There were some of these writings, but there was no Bible as we know it, the New Testament. And yet they believe. And they believe because of the eyewitnesses. You go to court, you sit in a trial, and you watch, and the heaviest of the evidence will be within those eyewitness accounts of what happens. As they give details, and as they tell you how things unfolded, and you listen to them. And that's exactly what they did. They had the eyewitness accounts of a resurrected Savior. And the news spread and it spread and it impacted lives. And he said, you will be my witnesses. You guys will be my witnesses, and you will tell everybody that you've seen. And they did. And they did. The foundation of the Christian faith is an event, an extraordinary event with profound implications. So what changed these guys' minds? What changed their minds? What went from, being behind a locked door, all scared to death, are they coming to get me, to all of a sudden we read about it, in Acts that Peter and John and some of the other disciples, they are standing before the exact same religious leaders that had Jesus arrested, convicted, and crucified. And they're standing in front of these guys, and they're bold, and they're basically pointing their fingers at him and go, you're the reason why he's dead. And we'll tell you right now, he didn't stay dead. What causes somebody, knowing good and well that your life hangs in the balance, that they could do to you the same as they did to Jesus? What gives you that kind of boldness? What gives you that kind of courage? Something changed within these men. Something changed in these women. What was that? Peter would believe, and then unbelieve, and then believe, and then unbelieve again. He would unfollow, and eventually, because of not just his beliefs, but because of what he saw a dead man alive, Jesus. He would be executed there by Nero in Rome. And so, and he doesn't die for his beliefs. He dies because of what he saw. He says, I can't untell you what I've seen. And so, here's what Peter writes before his death. 1 Peter chapter 1. He said, praise be to God and the Father, Lord Jesus Christ. In his great mercy, he has given us new birth in a living hope. And this hope that he's talking about isn't a verb. This hope that he talks about is a noun. It's something we can hang on to. It's something we can grasp and draw into. But based on what, Peter? Based on that he was a good teacher, based on, that he was a good man, based on what? He said, through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead and into an inheritance. An inheritance, an inheritance. Who usually gets an inheritance? The kids, the children do, right? They typically get the inheritance that can never perish, spoil, or fade, kept in heaven for you. This was unusual for a Jewish person to even talk about heaven. In the Old Testament, look it up. Look for yourself. In the Old Testament, in their laws and prophets, as the Hebrew Bible, it's rarely talked about. Heaven is rarely talked about. But Jesus comes along, and he talks about it over and over again. I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go to prepare a place for you, I will come again. And so, here, Peter recognizes it. He knows there's a heaven for all of us. That this is just a warm-up act. And he says, who through faith are shielded by God's power until the coming of salvation that is ready to be revealed in this last time. In this you greatly rejoice, though now for a little while you have suffered grief in all kinds of trial. Peter would say, you know what? I've been beaten. I've been jailed. I've been put in jail. I've been beaten some more. Paul, oh man, he's got a longer list, man, of all these things that's happened to him. Every one of these, almost every one of the disciples were martyred. They died a horrific death. You go back and look at the church history, especially in that first century. You look at Nero, and you look at those things. These people died horrific deaths. Peter, Peter would say, my faith is not tethered to an imaginary God who doesn't allow bad things to happen to good people. You see, all of us have had things that maybe made you think a little bit. Why would a good God, or how does a good God allow bad things to happen to good people? How does this suffering, how does all these things, how does this happen? And Peter would say, it does. It does. But don't make God into your image. That your faith is tethered to circumstances. You see, through all the circumstances, I choose to believe. I can't help but believe what Jesus did for me. I mean, look at what happened to him. You see, he knew that the worst imaginable thing happened to the best person he had ever known. And that an imaginary God doesn't allow bad things to happen to good people. That wasn't true. Their faith was introduced to them by Jesus and a God who invites them to call him Heavenly Father. The resurrection reframed Peter's life. It can reframe your life. Peter followed Jesus. And he ran away when things got scary. And he lied and he denied. What changed him? What changed him? What caused him to run towards danger and be fearless and courageous, even to the point of death? It wasn't the teachings of Jesus. It was the resurrection of Jesus. And then Peter goes on, and he changes up a little bit. He says, these have come so that your faith, of greater worth than gold, which perishes even through refined by fire, may be proved genuine and may result in praise and glory and honor when Jesus Christ is revealed. And some of you have experienced that. Though you have not seen him, and he's talking about us, he's talking to this group of people who hadn't seen Jesus. They didn't see him, rise from the dead. And so he goes, I know you haven't seen him, but yet you love him. And even though you do not see him now, you believe in him and are filled with an inexpressible and glorious joy. For you are receiving the goal of your faith and the salvation of your souls. You wonder why Christ's followers can have strength in difficult times in their lives? It's because we realize this is just a warm-up act. Yes, we understand sin in the world. We understand the damages and the consequences of sin, absolutely. But we also know that this is just a small, small portion of what God has in store for us. Peter goes on. He says, for you know that it was not the perishable things such as silver or gold that you were redeemed from the empty way of life handed down to you from your forefathers, but with the precious blood of Christ, a lamb without blemish or defect. And he takes their minds to that there had to be a sacrifice. There had to be an ultimate sacrifice for us so that we can have this relationship with God. And he says he was chosen before the creation of the world, but was revealed in the last times for your sake. Through him, you believe in God. Through Jesus Christ, you believe in God, who raised him from the dead and glorified him. So your faith and your hope can be in God. So what is the point? What's the point of this? What's the point? That we would know that God is for us because Jesus died for us. Not because everything always works out for us. This was the power of the resurrection. That these men and women emerged with courage. They discovered a personal God. That suffering is not the evidence of God's absence. That heaven is real. And that Jesus taught about it. You see, the resurrection frees us and confirms that everything that Jesus taught, that God did so love the world, that he did give his only Son, that whosoever would believe in him would not perish, but have everlasting life, that forgiveness is available, that grace is amazing and abundant, that you and I can have a personal relationship with the God that created all of this. I mean, anything that you can see, as far as your eyes can see, into the stars and into the heavens, into the oceans that are so deep. this Creator, wants a relationship, a personal one-to-one relationship with you. And it's because of what His Son did for us that we can have that relationship. And we can believe it because the eyewitnesses said it was so. We can hang our hat on that. For those of you that have crossed that line of faith, oh man, we've been given this huge responsibility. We've talked about it the last couple of weeks. And we've been given this huge responsibility that Jesus takes all the commandments, 600 and some odd plus of them, and He squeezes them all down and He puts them down into one. And He says, here it is. Here it is. He goes, I want you to love one another as I have loved you. Really? Yeah. I want you to love one another as I have loved you. It seems a little easier, but it's far more demanding. And we say it like this: what does love require of me? And whatever that situation is, and whatever that conversation, and whatever that thing at work, whatever that is, what does love require of me? Because Jesus paid the ultimate sacrifice for you and for me. So what are you going to do with it? What are you going to do with it? Let me pray with you. Heavenly Father, God, your grace is so amazing and so bountiful and it's so incredible. Father, I pray that, man, you would speak to the hearts of each and every person here. Father, if it's a person that hasn't discovered your salvation, that they will. If it's somebody who has and they've just kind of drifted off and kind of doing their own thing, their own deal, Father, that they would recognize that you hold us to a standard. You hold us to a standard of what does love require of me? That we might love others as you have loved others. Man, and that's hard sometimes. Father, we ask these things in your Son's precious name. Amen.
I was buried beneath my shame.
Jesus Christ, that we receive this amazing and incredible gift that we get to enjoy while we're here and we get to enjoy for eternity. And so my question for you is, have you accepted that gift? Have you engaged in that type of a relationship with God, that you've surrendered all to Him? God, here's all the bad things I have done. God, would you forgive me? Would you save me? You can do that right there, right where you are. Right this moment, just to pray simply, God, say, forgive me. I want to make you the boss of my life. Would you do that? Would you do that now?
Jesus arose with our freedom in hand. That's when death was arrested.